Hey y'all, what's up? Welcome back to Roots and Refuge Farm. I'm Jess and we are currently in my garden. It's a beautiful spring evening and today we are going to do a devotional for the first time in a little while. I haven't posted a devotional in a couple of months, primarily because we've just been really busy and it's a lot easier to shoot a 15-minute vlog rather than sit down without being interrupted. But I actually have had something on my heart the last couple of days. This is my second attempt at recording this and hopefully I'll get through it. So today I actually want to talk to you guys about dreaming and about vision. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because I get to live an incredible amount of fulfillment in my life. And so what you see on a regular basis here on my channel, here at my farm, this is the fulfillment of vision for me. So I wanted a farm forever. I mean, from when I was a little girl. Not like a big agriculture farm. I would tell people that and they would be like, you don't really want to do that. But I think they were envisioning maybe like commercial chicken houses and like commercial operations. And that was never my dream. It was always like a small farm and a quaint life. But like I got bit with the bug really bad. Probably about 12 or 13 years ago. I started getting into like natural living, cloth diapers with my oldest son and different things like that. And that kind of led to understanding our broken food system. My second son was born with food allergies and that was a downward spiral into like understanding how needed it is to grow your own food. And by the time Maya and I met, I was divorced, single mom with two little boys. And when we were in that kind of discovery stage of talking on the phone all night, I told him I want this so badly, and he was like, okay. So 5 years into our marriage, we were living in town. He was doing full-time ministry. I was a student and doing photography, and we were so far off from being able to find a house in the country. Just adding that much to our gas budget was impossible, much less actually purchasing a house and having any sort of money for infrastructure. It was just like, it wasn't happening. And I was desperate, just so desperate. And I remember now, there were certain things that I would dream of. There were little things that I would think about. Like I would think about spotted goats, like I really wanted spotted goats. And I would think about chickens all the time. But beyond that, there were other things, like really small details that really moved my heart. Like I used to imagine having a honey pot on my kitchen table and like homemade butter, like that being like a regular part of our life. And these little details that I would imagine that were, for at that time, all intents and purposes, very impossible. Like it wasn't my life. It was far off from it. We found a foreclosure, and I mean, just one of those things where every door just flung wide open that should have been shut, and every time we needed an extension we got one, and it was just God did it. And we got this house as a foreclosure, and we were actually able to afford it. It was big enough for our family, and we started our farming venture. And in the beginning of that, we got really afraid, like in understanding like the climate of our nation and just the desperation for how corrupt things are when you look into our food system. We got so scared, and we thought, we have to do this. We like there was this urgency to it that was not the heart of God. It was very much our own fear. We stepped into trying to make things happen on our own. We went into debt. We bit off more than we could chew. We didn't pray about things. It wasn't a matter of, should we do this now? How should we do this? It was just like gung-ho, do as much as we can, as fast as we can. And there wasn't a lot of peace in it. And so I'm telling you all of this backstory because I want you to understand, like now, when you see me walking through this beautiful dream garden and living this beautiful dream life, and I recognize and acknowledge 100% that you are right. That is exactly what this is. This is a dream life, and once it was mine. It was my dream life, and it still is, but there was a time that it was sincerely impossible. I do not look back over the unfolding of the last 6 years and be like, well, if you just worked as hard as we did, then you would have all of this, because that would be foolish of me to say. This was 100% the goodness of God moving on the desires of my heart. And yes, it has been a tremendously difficult journey with a lot of hard work and trust on our part. But there were times where we totally screwed it up, made the wrong choice, and the goodness of God prevailed even then, because we're really not big enough to mess up his plan in our life. My friend Lauren and I have a joke where we say rerouting, because, you know, sometimes you take a wrong turn and your GPS says rerouting, and it turns you back around. And usually it adds a few minutes to your trip, but you still end up at the same destination. And that has been our journey on our farm. We've had a few rerouting moments that I think probably slowed us down along the way, but even our greatest failures, and even our stubbornness or fear or any of those things, it wasn't enough to change the destination that God had for us. All of that to kind of set the stage for the topic that I really wanted to talk to you about today, and that is vision. The reason why I want to address being in impossible situations is because the number one way that you get into a place of hopelessness is when you forfeit vision over your life, and you come into agreement with the lie that God does not care about where you are, and that he does not care about the direction of your life and the destination of the journey that you're on. And that's where we become hopeless. And it's very easy to become hopeless when you, because of circumstances or choices either way, whenever you have to live in survival mode for so long. I had opportunity to go up to Washington a couple months ago with my doTERRA team, and hung out with Shay from the Elliott Homestead, and she had us do this exercise. And it was for business building, but it literally was such an incredible tool that I think I will apply this in so many situations and helping people from now on. And I want to encourage you even now to just do this exercise with me, and let's really let's dig down and get to the bottom of where our dreams are. Basically, the exercise was to say, if money weren't an issue, what are the top 5 things that you would do? And everybody's list looked like, new roof, working vehicle, not having to stress out at the grocery store. But they were pretty basic things. And she was like, okay, now those are done. The next 5. And everybody's like, oh man, okay. And you got to start thinking a little bit harder. Like, what would I do next? And then it's like, okay, those are done. The next 5. And then it's just like mind-boggling. And you're thinking, well, I don't even know what I would do. I've really chewed on that a lot since then. And I've really come to realize that survival mode and the lack of vision because of hopelessness, hope deferred does make a heart sick. And when our heart gets sick, we can't look forward, and we forget who God is. Anyway, I'll get to that. Essentially, I realized in that exercise that there are so many people who survival mode has stolen their vision, and it's quenched their dreams, and it's kept them from pushing forward, and they stay there. They stay oppressed. They stay in survival mode, and they stay hopeless. And the answer to that is 100%. It's the identity of God. Everything that we choose to do in our life is based on who God is in our mindsets, who we believe God is, and who we believe we are in Him. We wear our mindsets out loud. If you come across broken people and they're ugly to you and they're hurtful to you, that's their mindsets. You are coming in contact with people's mindsets. If you realize that, you can have compassion on broken people, because you realize that their brokenness is sharp and it cuts you. And instead of being concerned about yourself, you begin to have compassion for other people. And the thing is that our mindsets they control so much of our actions and our choices. I began to learn a few years ago, really, when I got my farm, whenever this happened, it blew my mind. Like, truly just blew my mind, because we had made financial decisions that weren't the best. I didn't deserve it, essentially. And I realized, I don't deserve this. Like, what did I do to deserve this? And I realized that that's not even on the table where Jesus is concerned. Like my deservingness of God's goodness is just not even on the table whenever we're clothed in the righteousness of Christ. And it really just like tore the lid off for me on what I was willing to believe God for, because this lifelong dream just came true. I used to sit in the chicken yard. This was actually the chicken yard where we are right now, is where my chicken coop used to be. I used to sit out here for, I mean, like, I'd come out here every single day and sit for like an hour. Is where I'd have my prayer time. And I would just cry looking at my chickens, because I wanted chickens for so long. I wanted those chickens. And I would sit here and be like, you're so good. Over these birds, because it was impossible before. I had genuinely believed that it was impossible. And so when that happened, whenever I began to realize, like, okay, like God is really in the business of making our dreams come true and fulfilling the desires of our heart whenever we go after him, and when we seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, that he really does add all these things to us. Like, this is really who he is. And I started to like really confront the mindsets and the areas where I was not walking in that belief, like in an actual sense. Are you gonna be the garden photo bomber today? You're giving George a run for his money? That kind of began the process of searching this out, and of asking God, okay, where are the wrong mindsets that I have about you as a father? And, you know, Jesus, where are the wrong mindsets that I have about you as a bridegroom? Like, where are the wrong mindsets that I have about you as a provider? Because I want to agree with what you say about you. And I also want to agree with what you say about me. And I want to agree with your vision over my life, instead of clamoring for scraps, essentially, and hoping that maybe I might have some scraps of the vision that I had for myself. And I wanted to trade that in, and instead I wanted to receive his vision over my life, because I knew, I mean, it's got to be way better. And so we moved onto the farm. It wasn't a farm, it was a foreclosure with just like none of this was here. It was just no fences, no anything at all. And we set to work. We kind of got off track, rerouting, handful of times. And after we'd been here for about 2 years-ish, something like that, it was a January afternoon. It was a warm January afternoon. I remember it was like one of those warm afternoons that feels like a touch of heaven if you hate being cold like me. And like you get those random warm days that are literally like glorious, because you can go outside and not feel like you're dying. And it was like a 50-degree afternoon in January, and I so desperately needed that. And so I was walking around the farm, and this is before we had most of what we have now. I had not started a large garden. And that particular day I had actually walked out in the woods over here where now the chicken coop is, and at the time it was just wooded. And I raised my hands up, and I mentioned this recently in a vlog, that I raised my hands up and I was just praying. And I was really contemplating the scripture Ephesians 3:20, and really contemplating what it means that he will give us infinitely more than we could ask or imagine. That scripture had been really heavy on my heart when we got this house, and that particular day a friend of mine had texted it to me the night before. I was out and I was thinking about that, and I started to wonder, what does that mean, infinitely more than I could imagine? Now, I was a child with a very, very active imagination. Let's be real. I'm an adult with a very active imagination, but like as a child, it was a lot. And I would write stories about unicorns, and I would write, you know, all of these different things. And I just had such a, you know, I loved to do art, and I just had such this wild imagination. And growing up, I kind of ran into some walls, basically that being discouraged. Because you get terms like head in the clouds and, just daydreaming always. And people really will discourage you to kind of come back to reality and live in reality. And it is true that you can become dissatisfied with reality if you let yourself, when you're a daydreamer, when you're a dreamer. But I think that there has to be a better way than turning the dreams off. I think it's more about focusing on satisfaction and continuing to dream. But I basically had allowed that to get discouraged in me. And even in the years that I really desperately wanted a farm, my dreams made my heart sick. And so I would begin to dream about a farm, and I would begin to have these little visions and these little ideas about honey pots on the table and these different things. And the longing was so great that I would shut it down because it hurt. We moved in and there was some satisfaction in that, but there were so many discouragements. We were so broke. This particular warm January afternoon, we had really considered giving up and scaling back and stopping and maybe focusing on some other efforts that could make some more money. And that particular day, it just struck me that Ephesians 3:20 was a blank check on my imagination. And that God was basically saying that if I would be bold enough to imagine it, then I could be certain that he would meet me there and treat it like a diving board. Like infinitely more than we could ask or imagine. And I just started to think about the places where I wasn't asking God because I was afraid in my wrong mindsets that maybe he didn't think I was worthy of it, or that I was afraid that I would be disappointed, or I was afraid of that longing turning into a black hole inside of me again that just made me feel so hopeless. I was afraid of survival mode. I was afraid of hopelessness. I was afraid of hope deferred, making my heart sick. And so I kind of just stopped asking and stopped dreaming and just being like, okay, I'm just going to focus on what's right here. But that wasn't actually contentedness. And so this particular day, I was thinking about what it means to have a promise of surpassing imagination. And I just thought, if somebody who I knew to have infinite resources came to me and said, I have infinite resources. Now I want you to ask. I'm using money as an example, but it's not about money, really. That's just what holds a lot of people back. But it could be the agreement of your spouse. It could be your health. It could be a lot of other things. But I'm using money as an example because that's the one that for a lot of people is the easiest to relate to. It's also the starting ground. Once you get the money, it's easier to believe for the other things. It's the ground level faith thing. But if somebody said, I'm going to surpass it, ask for anything. Ask for anything. I'm not going to say $100. If somebody says, hey, I'm going to go infinitely above what you ask. Where are you going to start? I'm not going to say $50. I'm not going to say $100. I'm not going to say $1 million. I'm going to think of the largest number that I know is an actual number. And I'm going to say that. Infinite resources. I'm going to go to the very end of my capacity to comprehend. And let's go infinitely more than that. Because his capacity is so much better than mine. It's so much greater than mine. So actually, we don't even lean on our own understanding. We trust in him and he makes our path straight. So why do I have to lean into my capacity for what God has for me? I don't want my capacity on his. And he doesn't have an end. And so I'm going to dream at the end of myself, knowing that he's going to treat that like a diving board. And that particular day, God unlocked some vision over my farm. That's actually the first time that I ever saw the vision of my garden. And I just, in my imagination, my mind's eye, I just saw these long raised beds. I'd never seen raised beds this long before. I thought, you can't really do that, can you? And I went and I talked to Jeremiah. I was like, I just want to do these long raised beds. And I had this vision for this. I went inside. I was so excited. I was so eager. And I went inside and I drew it. It was very theatrical. I took this big roll of paper that I had, kids' art paper, rolled it out on the table and sketched it all up. It was so cool. And I wrote Ephesians 3:20 and just wrote it out my best handwriting on the top. And then shortly after, we sat down and we started to calculate the cost of it. And once I figured out how many thousands of dollars that it was going to cost just to bring the soil in to fill beds that long, I was so dejected. Isn't that crazy how God can just touch your mind and give you revelation, and then you come back to reality, and then all of a sudden that becomes your reality? And that night I went to church, and I just kept having this feeling that I needed to ask my friend Matt to pray for me. And I went to him after the church service was over, and I was like, hey, would you mind praying for me? I'm feeling really discouraged today. And he put his hand on my shoulder, and the first thing out of his mouth, he said, Jessica, I know you love your chickens. Now, the vision that I'd had of the garden was in my chicken yard. And we moved the chicken coop over in this vision into the woods, which you see that now, because where you see the garden now wasn't the chicken yard. But he said, I know you love your chickens, but I feel like God's saying that you need to move your chickens to the side and start focusing on your garden. And I just started to weep, because I knew, like, okay, I have no idea at all how this is even in the realm of possibility. But I'm going to hang on to the infinitely more than I can imagine. And I'm going to imagine this boldly, with all the certainty that God is God and that he loves me. That was 4 years ago. And this is now. Let's walk. You know, the thing is, we're still finishing this. Like, it's been a 4-year process. The first year we had no garden. The second year we started it. Last year was the 3rd year after that vision. And then now we're finishing it, building the pavilion and the cottage garden. So this has been a process. This has been a process that has so many cool, like, faith bits and so many cool moments where God broke through. I mean, just the way that this has come together has been nothing short of miraculous. And then on top of it, because God really does do infinitely more than what we could ask or think, then he gave me a YouTube channel where I get to bring tens of thousands of people into the garden that he planted inside my heart and asked me to believe him for. And I get to share it with them. And how many gardens have sprung out of this garden? How many seeds have gone out of here and created a desire and a love for being in the garden elsewhere? Is that amazing? Is that not infinitely more? And this is like 4 years in, 3.5. Is that not amazing when you think about that? And I'm telling you all of that because I'm still dreaming for big things and I'm still asking God for vision. But I want to encourage you with testimony because the word says that God is not a respecter of persons. And I'm telling you this because it was impossible for me. It's probably easy from where you're sitting to look at where we are and say, oh, well, that's them. And they have this and they have that. And here's all the reasons why that's going to work for them and that why it won't work for me. And if you so choose not to put this on for yourself, then really that's on you and I can't make you. But if there's something inside of you that you have shut down the imagination of and shut down the dreaming of because you're afraid or because you've been disappointed or because your heart is sick, please listen to the testimony that I'm telling you right now from the garden that I saw standing over in the woods 3.5 years ago that was not within my realm of making happen. And hear this testimony and be encouraged by it and understand that testimony in itself is prophecy. Understand that testimony in itself, that is a word. It is a testament of who God is. And if he is that for me, he will be that for you. Turn to him and he will be that for you. Talk to him about it and he will be that for you. Ask him for the visions over your life. And if you are believing for a spouse to be on board with you, begin to imagine them being on board with you. Don't let that fuel discontent. This could have fueled discontent, and had it fueled discontent, that first year that I had no garden, I wouldn't have been learning about how to grow here. The first year that I had a couple of raised beds, I wouldn't have been learning. Last year, whenever it wasn't complete and it wasn't the fullness of the vision that I had seen, I wouldn't have shared it on YouTube. You can't allow where you are to breed discontent. You can't allow your vision to breed discontent because that's like the enemy's last ditch effort to rob from you. But if you will just be content in where you are in the process, but begin to envision, dream about it and ask the Lord, what does this look like? But what more? And now that he started to show me like YouTube, you better believe I'm dreaming big. You better believe that I'm dreaming even bigger because it wasn't like I had that one shot for him to say, I'll infinitely surpass this. Like, that's ongoing. And so the dreams I'm dreaming now are diving boards for God. Like the dreams I'm dreaming now, when he came and every time he comes and he brings fulfillment in our life, we get to push out the ends of ourself. We get to push out like the places where we didn't think he could go past, where we weren't sure what that would look like. And we get to push it out, and we get to take a few steps further into our wild imagination and our wild dreams and what we're willing to believe him for. Like, what does that look like for you? I have no idea. But for those of you who are believing for your prodigal son and daughter, for your grandchildren, for your friends, where you're believing for freedom out of addiction for yourself or for somebody else, where you're believing for God to be God in your life, like, just get to the end of yourself and begin imagining to the very end of yourself, and begin envisioning to the very end of yourself what that means, and praise him for it. Because our requests and what we're willing to believe him for, that is absolutely 100% the declaration of our true mindsets of who God is. What we're willing to say, okay, God, I believe you for a farm. I believe you for a husband that's on fire for you. I believe you for my child to come home. I believe you for wholeness of my body. I believe you for enough. I believe you for more than enough. I believe you to get out of lack. Like, the ability to believe God for those things is the truest marker for us to know where our mindsets are about him. And the thing is if you pray your prayers, I heard somebody say once that we have to stop praying lottery scratch-off prayers. You know, we have to stop praying maybe. Maybe will you do this, maybe we do that. Don't think for a moment that you're going to twist the arm of God, but do absolutely be honest with yourself about how you're praying and how it is exactly that you are confessing your heart towards him. And it never fails when I start talking about this. Somebody says, well, you think that God is concerned about you having little details whenever there are some people that are in destitution. Where's my dog? Come here, Bear. My dog was a prayer for me. Like, I believe God cares so much about me that he would give me the exact dog that I wanted. I wanted a shepherd dog that would be underneath my feet all the time. And I wanted him so bad for years. And I began to envision him, and I began to think about him. And then literally this dog just falls into my lap and is everything that I asked for. Even more so, I just didn't even know that he could be so good. And yes, I believe that God cares about those details, because do you know that with one woman who is sold out and convinced that God cares that she has the dog she wants, how many people in destitution can be reached by that woman? Ask yourself that right now. Because when one person becomes convinced of who God is and who they are in him, they actually have the capacity to be a change in the earth. Because he made us to be image bearers. And so that's the whole plan. And so, yes, he cares about the details. Yes, he cares about your garden. Yes, he cares about your marriage. He absolutely cares about those things. And what he needs more than anything is for you to be convinced that he cares. And then the unlocking that happens in your life and the fulfillment that happens in your life at that point. Like, I am so thankful that I couldn't have done this myself. I'm so thankful that now whenever I tell you, this is what God's done in my life, you can't say, oh, well, you really did that yourself. No, I didn't. I did not do that. Whenever I used to sit and read the homestead books, whenever I was the single mom, I was giving plasma to put gas in my car. I could not do this. I could not do this. Right now, what you see is a door that I could not have opened on my own. That's true, and that's a testimony. And so, yes, I am convinced. I am 100% convinced that God cares about the details. I am unlocked and unleashed to dream very wild dreams, because the end of me has been extended quite a lot by things that have happened and that have come to pass that I couldn't make happen. And so that is why right now I am encouraging you to look for vision and to confront your mindsets and confront the places in your life where your declaration and your willingness to ask don't line up with the reality of who God is according to his word. Because he is Jehovah Jireh. He is God who provides. He's Jehovah Rapha. He's God who heals. He is an adoring father. He has the cattle on 1,000 hillsides. Do you think that he is any the less off. Do you think he's worse off because he makes your dreams come true? Do you think that there's a deduction on his bank account whenever he begins to fund your dreams and he has to somehow go and balance the ledger? That's not how any of this works. Those are not mindsets that belong on your Father in heaven. I don't know what your dream is, but I am going to confidently say that it's not big enough. Every single one of you, I don't know what your dream is. I don't know what details you have given up hoping for, or the areas where you've shaved the edges off trying to make it fit into the realm of possibility, or where you've given up entirely. But I know that we live in an earth that is waiting on bated breath for the manifestation of the sons of God. Like, we live in a culture that is largely broken. We live surrounded by broken people that are waiting on dreamers to stand up and begin thinking of the largest number that they know, and believing that God cares about the little details in their life. And so of course he would do infinitely more than they ask or imagine. I imagine at this point it has nothing to do with stuff. God used the stuff to convince me. He did. He used the garden, he used the long garden beds, and he filled them up with soil just to convince me. And he gave me a stupid seed collection when I used to pinch pennies to be able to buy seeds. He gave me a job where people send me seeds all the time. He literally took the things that I wanted more than anything and so surpassed them that literally I can use the word infinitely. Laughably, he surpassed them. To the point that the things that I used to long for, he comes with such abundance that sometimes I'm like, whoa, what am I supposed to do with all this? Like, I have to actually lean into him to deal with the abundance of the things that I used to long for. Is that crazy? And so now I don't imagine this stuff anymore. That's a given. I talk to him about it, but I don't long for it. I just wait for it. But do you know what? I imagine videos like this going and thousands of people beginning to believe God for big dreams. That's what I'm imagining. I imagine like a generation that is actually like wildly on fire, that like find worship in a garden and understand what it's like to walk with him in the cool of the day. Like, I imagine people who have never been brave enough to sing before. I imagine them singing and their song just filling the earth with worship. I imagine people walking as image bearers. God used the stuff to convince me who he was and how concerned he was in the details, to push me beyond myself so that the diving board that I give him is so much further beyond what it used to be. I want to encourage you to be brave and turn your imagination on and begin being brave in your dreams and come out of agreement with lies and shame. Because the bottom line is, if you don't feel worthy of the things that you're dreaming for, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be. He's good enough to make up for our unworthiness. He calls us worthy, therefore we are. Whenever you dream, is Jesus worthy of it? Because if you're cloaked in his righteousness, you're dreaming as him. Jesus is dreaming, so dream with Jesus. And every time you feel unworthy, you say, oh no, Jesus is worthy of this dream. And it's okay if it's a dog, or if it's a garden bed, or if it's thousands of people dreaming. All of those are equally possible to God. Thank you guys. God bless you. Until next time. Come on, Bear. Let's go inside.